And as a professing Christian, we know that homosexuality is a moral choice. It's not something that we are born with. A lot of people have a belief that we are born with it. Some people are born with the inherent tendency or is a natural inclination for them to be drawn towards the same sex. And I mean, and my response would be, well, we're all born with the tendency to sin. Whether it be some kids are just naturally angry, some kids are just naturally very jealous. You know, some kids are very drawn towards lustful situations. We all have tendencies. But yet, as human beings, we need to control those tendencies. We need to learn how to crucify the flesh. And the Bible constantly puts homosexuality in that same category. In fact, the New Testament's teaching on homosexuality, you can write this down. For those who want a clipboard, we have clipboards. If you're a note taker, if you're not a note taker, I understand. But we want to provide that for the note takers who kind of have a hard time writing notes. Matthew 19, verses 1 through 8, Jesus in that verse affirmed marriage. He said in the beginning God created them male and female. So God's original intention is a monogamous, heterosexual marriage covenant. And Jesus made it very clear that the Genesis story was God's intention. And so a lot of times you'll hear the gay pastors and gay theologians saying stuff like, well, Jesus never mentioned homosexuality. Well, he didn't mention the word homosexuality, but he definitely implicitly validated the Old Testament teachings on sexuality, which in Leviticus 20 and 18 is very clear that a man should not have a relationship with another man. And then their response will be to Leviticus 20 is, well, it also says in Leviticus, if you eat, certain fish, shellfish, and so on and so forth, that's also evil. So therefore, you can't take Leviticus too seriously, or you have to read Leviticus in a cultural context. And of course, that's absurd, because Leviticus also has the golden rule that Obama quoted this week, which is to love your neighbor as yourself, as the basis of our morality. Leviticus quotes the golden rule, and Leviticus quotes all the 10 Commandments, which no Christian would say the 10 Commandments are not binding for a Christian. We're not saved by keeping the 10 Commandments, because none of us can. We're all sinners. Inherently, we're all sinners. All of us. So none of us can keep the 10 Commandments. But none of us would say that once you become a Christian, you're not obligated by the Spirit of God to keep the 10 Commandments. The Spirit of God produces love in you. In Romans chapter 13, I didn't write it here, but Romans 13, verse 8, Paul makes a reference that the entire law is summed up in one word, love. The first 4 parts of the 10 Commandments are laws that tell us how to love God. That's the first and greatest commandment, Jesus said. The second part of the 10 Commandments, the 5th through 10th, the last 6 are laws about how to love people. So when someone quotes the golden rule, I just want to love people as myself, what they're ultimately saying is you have to love people the way that Jesus and Yahweh told us in the Old Testament, which is the 10 Commandments. To love God and to love people is wrapped up in the 10 Commandments. Paul says the whole law, the 10 Commandments, is summed up in that one rule, to love God and your neighbor as yourself. So the New Testament teaching on homosexuality is clear. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 32. Paul makes reference to the fact that humanity, because of its depravity and its wickedness, humanity, because of their wickedness, is becoming so morbid that men are having relations with men and women are having relations with women. That's in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 32. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9 through 11, Paul says that fornicators, adulterers, homosexuals, thieves, sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom of God. So in 1 Corinthians 6-9, Paul, and in Romans, Paul the Apostle, makes clear, explicit statements about homosexuality. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10, he also says that homosexuals are breaking God's law. Now, if you go back to Leviticus 18 and 20, Moses clearly describes homosexuality in the same school of thought as human beings having sex with animals, bestiality, having sex with your relatives. Now understand that God told Moses to put that because God knows our human potential on the wicked side, on the evil side. That we have a great potential to do great evil, whether it be sexual or thievery or political. People can do really, really evil things. So God gave all these prescriptions. And when you look at Leviticus, Leviticus is mixed with ceremonial laws, moral laws, and civil laws. Some of those ceremonial laws were only for Israel, or they were only for a time, and Jesus fulfilled the ceremony. But the moral laws that are there, that really, Leviticus 18, 19, and 20, are really an exposition or a clarification of the Ten Commandments. Just like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5-7, Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder, but I say unto you, that even if you hate, or you say raka, meaning you call people a fool out of your anger and hatred, it's like murder. He says, you have heard that you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, even if you lust after people, pornography, whatever it is, checking people out at South Beach, going to the beach, you know, he says it's sin. So Jesus actually takes the Ten Commandments and expounds on it, but he doesn't do it on all the Ten Commandments, he does it on a few. In Matthew chapter 5-7, and chapter 5-7. And that's what Leviticus 18, 19, and 20 is. It's an exposition of the Ten Commandments. Mark, can we turn on the house lights? I think there's a switch back there. I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting kind of sleepy in here. It's like, hey, Pastor, this is cool. Keep talking, man. Woo! You know? But that's what is going on in Leviticus. That, again, many times the gay community will say, well, Leviticus 18, 19, and 20 doesn't apply because that was only speaking to Israel. Jesus affirmed the Old Testament moral codes and their consequences. Okay? Jesus affirmed the Old Testament moral codes and their consequences. Why? Because he wrote them as the Logos.